Hello and welcome to today's Masterclass, Beyond Single Cloud, Designing Resilient Citrix Architectures across Azure and AWS. Today we have a great panel for you. I'm honored to introduce Jason Samuel, Senior Principal Product Manager at Cloud Software Group, Joe Jabbour, a Senior Specialist Solutions Architect at Amazon Web Services, Michael Shuster, CEO at Ferroque Systems, and Zeljko Macanovic, Chief Architect at Ferroque Systems. I encourage you all to please submit any questions you have in the chat below. We'll be getting to those at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Michael to get us started.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone. My name is Michael Shuster. Thanks for spending a bit of time with us here. So Ferroque Systems is a end user infrastructure and security reseller that focuses on delivering EUC and security services to a multitude of clients across US, Canada, and beyond. And with that, we'll hop into our agenda. All right, so we're going to be running through the following in our presentation today. Number one, the realities of enterprise risk and single cloud risk. Then we'll move on to talking where it makes sense to adopt multi-cloud strategies for organizations with EUC deployments, diversifying EUC workloads with AWS, design considerations, alternative clouds, and having a practical conversation and getting those conversations going with other stakeholders within the organization. Before we get going in the presentation, let's do a quick polling question. Does your organization have a multi-cloud mandate today? And this can be a broad multi-cloud mandate, i.e., doesn't have to be specific to EUC, but is there a mandate to adopt a multi-cloud system within the organization for resiliency purposes in particular, or just best of breed? And if you're fully all in on one particular cloud, totally cool. We're just looking to get a bit of data.
These are rolling in. Thank you all for the participation. We really appreciate it. Okay. Should be sharing the results here, but it looks like 27% said yes, 40% said no, and 33% are unsure.
Interesting. Well, that's relatively telling. And I'll be curious to see if we ask that same question in a couple of years, how that would look. And with that, let's move on to the introduction. All right. So, in full honesty, I used to be a person that would advocate for multi-cloud strategies for best of breed technologies, i.e., use a cloud X over here because they've got really good database or GPU capabilities and AI capabilities, and use cloud Y because they're really good at uh, something else specific that we're using in the organization. That opinion of mine has shifted over the last few years, as I think it probably has with a lot of people that adopted the mantra of multi-cloud is great, but only for best of breed, because we've seen how many outages that have occurred in specific clouds. And because particular clouds might have services that are built across the share that services across the board, create far-reaching impacts that we could ever have initially imagined. So over the last few decades, we've experienced a significant shift from on-prem and in-house systems to third-party solutions across our infrastructure, apps, identity, so on and so forth. And while convenient to organizations to do that, this has opened up a lot of exposure to new systems availability and IT supply chain risks that are not under the organization's control. Not all of us are strangers to the news, again, as I mentioned, that we've seen in recent years where impacts in, let's say, a cloud platform have had significant impacts to various types of operations, whether it's accessing banking, hospital and airline operational impacts, smart devices that suddenly go offline or go a bit haywire, workforce productivity being lost because data becomes inaccessible, and reputational damage and customer trust erosion. There's been growing pressure as a result of, as we've been slowly moving towards adopting third-party solutions and SaaS and IaaS solutions, there's been growing pressure to reduce single vendor risk across the supply chain. We've been talking to a number of organizations where they've got enterprise risk teams that really start looking at the overall delivery capabilities of what they are using and consuming in their environments and where their single points of failures and risks lie. And they start doing table talk exercises that look at, hey, if component or service X goes down, what does that mean to the business financially, productivity wise, regulatory? And this is why we're seeing more regulations. DORA in the UK, in Europe being probably one of the more recent examples of this, where their legislation is mandating resiliency across your third parties that banking institutions are adopting. But we're seeing this creep into SEC, PRA, FFIEC, and HIPAA as well. All have elements that start emphasizing the need to have resiliency in IT operations. And one thing we also want to be clear on is that recovery, in the sense of traditional DR, does not equal resilience. And DR also does not equal business continuity. Generally, disaster recovery is focused on infrastructure. It's focused on reactive and being event driven. It's owned by IT or operations typically, and it's often untested or ideally tested annually at minimum. I'd love to see customers testing it more regularly or adopting active scenarios where appropriate. That can get a bit expensive. Business resiliency, on the other hand, kind of flips things a little bit. It's generally more business led. It focuses on revenue, trust, and regulatory compliance. It's proactive, continuous, and it's a bit more broad level. And it's owned not just by IT, but it's owned across security, compliance, and business units themselves. And it generally tends to be tested regularly with evidence provided, because especially if you are in a market that requires regulatory compliance, you tend to have to provide some evidence. With that, I don't want to move on to our second polling question. Which cloud platforms does your organization currently use? Many may have more than one. That's cool. We're just curious to understand where our current audience that has joined us have their clouds in play. Is it AWS, Azure, GCP, IBM Cloud, Oracle, or other public cloud providers, or none at all? Curious to see your answers.
The
We work with a lot of
answers are
organizations that have many, so yeah.
answers are rolling in, and it is quite a diverse spread. So we'll give it just a couple more minutes. I don't know. All right. I believe you can all see it here. It looks like Microsoft Azure takes the cake, and AWS is in a close second.
Poor IBM Cloud. I am curious what the other public cloud providers are. Guess maybe we should have thrown Alibaba on there or something. All right. So let's talk a bit more about the realities of single cloud risk. And let's frame the issue a bit. Clouds power nearly every aspect of modern digital life and often does so invisibly. When there was an outage recently, I forget if it was AWS or Azure, when my bed stopped working, that was particularly interesting and unexpected, just as an example of how things creep into your life that way and how dependent everything is now. Trust in the cloud is high, but understanding its risk is often quite low. When hyperscalers fail, the ripple effect is immediate and widespread. And there's been some recent wake-up calls, including with AWS and Azure outages, disrupting banking, productivity, gaming, and IoT services, just as I mentioned. These issues weren't cyber attacks either, but internal configuration and service failures, usually as a result of human error. The bigger risk, however, is that there's a massive concentration of digital services under a few cloud providers, and platform-level failures create broad downstream disruption. Designed for resilience, but operational centralization introduces systemic risk. And this is what we need to start looking at and designing for as we go through our jobs as architects and engineers. And the key insight for enterprises is that when you have an over reliance on a single cloud, it's a strategic risk decision. Risk either of service outages that span regions or from a vendor lock-in perspective and leverage implications. Many organizations assume availability instead of engineering for failure, and resiliency must be intentional, not implied. The key issue with resiliency in our context is our critical business systems are all built on a collection of third-party capabilities from cloud, identity, APIs, and SaaS apps. Outages will happen, and we can't reasonably prevent Okta or AWS or GCP or Cloudflare from going down, but we can adjust our systems architecture to mitigate many scenarios. Most outages don't happen because systems fail, they happen because dependencies fail. And resilience requires flexibility across dependencies. And we can achieve that with a number of the capabilities that Citrix does have in place, whether it's from allowing for multiple identity providers, allowing for multiple clouds, and allowing you to diversify across multiple types of infrastructure dependencies within the overall solution. Let's talk a bit about where multi-cloud makes strategic sense. So, when we talk about multi-cloud making strategic sense, this is really where it shows up most clearly. Not every workload needs multi-cloud. For a lot of use cases, it can add unnecessary complexity. But there is a specific category where it does absolutely make sense. And that is where organizations with tier 0 or tier 1 use cases, where downtime just isn't inconvenient, but it creates severe business impact, creates revenue loss, operational disruption, regulatory exposure, et cetera, et cetera. Those are ones where generally those use cases, let's say in Citrix, you're going to want to spread across multiple clouds to ensure that if one goes down, the other can pick up the load and keep going without missing a beat. In those environments, availability is a board level concern, so you need to treat them accordingly and design them accordingly. So the question shifts from optimization to resilience. Multi-cloud in this context is not about flexibility for its own sake. It's a resiliency and risk mitigation strategy. You're designing for the assumption that something will fail and make sure that the failure doesn't take everything down with it. And a big part of that is reducing vendor concentration risk. When your entire workplace stack depends on a single provider, single identity plane, or a single region, you're tightly coupled into various failure modes accordingly. Multi-cloud introduces deliberate separation. It ensures that no single outage, whether it's platform, control plane, or regional, can fully disrupt your ability to operate. And that directly ties into protection against a broader range of outages. We've seen identity providers go down, we've seen major cloud regions fail, and we've seen edge services also degrade as a result. These are no longer edge cases, but they're expected events. So the real question becomes, when it does happen, can your users still work? Can they still access their critical systems? Can you shift execution without scrambling? That's where multi-cloud starts to provide its value. And there's also an internal benefit that's just important. When you take this approach, you significantly improve your posture with risk audit and compliance teams as well. It makes your lives a lot easier going forward as you go through your audit cycles. You're not just reacting to incidents, you're demonstrating that you're proactively reducing single points of failure, that you're built for continuity and you can operate through disruption. And that changes the conversation a fair bit, builds confidence, and that's really the point. Multi-cloud doesn't make sense everywhere, like I said, but in high impact environments, it tends to be non-negotiable. And what that also means is that where there's use cases that may not be tier 1 or tier 0, and you still want to leverage multi-cloud, you can do so in a more cost-effective way by keeping some use cases in cloud X, some use cases in cloud Y, and that way, if there is an outage, you may impact some use cases, but not all. You've minimized the blast radius as a result. Let's talk a little about diversing EUC workloads with AWS. Up to this point, most cloud-centric EUC strategies have had a bit more of a Microsoft entrenchment with customers, featuring Azure. And again, that makes sense if you're deep in a Microsoft shop and M365 or whatnot. It's just part and parcel with it. And I think from the original poll that we did or that earlier, that also kind of aligned there as well. Azure had a clear first mover advantage, let's be honest, especially with native alignment to Microsoft 365 licensing support. But that landscape has evolved as AWS invested more deeply in its end user computing, which again, AWS and EUC is nothing new. They have had an EUC focus for several decades, particularly with their focus on the Amazon workspaces capability AWS became supported for Microsoft 365 apps a while ago. It's the only other cloud that Microsoft officially supports Microsoft 365 apps on, which is a key consideration for customers. And that's an inflection point. So now you've got two hyperscalers, both with strong EUC capabilities, both able to support the same core productivity stack. So instead of anchoring entirely in a single platform, organizations can start to think about AWS, if they already haven't, as a logical extension of their EUC strategy. And given that most enterprises are already using both clouds for various workloads, this has become about transformation and less about transformation, I'd have to say, and more about intentional design. So the question shifts from why Azure and how do we leverage both Azure and AWS to better distribute and diversify your EUC workloads? And that's where I'm going to hand things off to our colleagues at Citrix and AWS to delve a little bit further into the Citrix and AWS integration, which has been around for quite a while, but has evolved significantly with Amazon Workspaces and Workspaces Core. And we'll also have AWS go through various aspects of Amazon Workspaces Core for those that may not be familiar with the EUC-centric platform. Over to you, Jason.
All right. Thank you, Michael. So my name is Jason Samuel, and I'm a product manager at Citrix, as Sarah introduced. I work primarily on the VDI DaaS team, and I wanted to kind of explain where we are right now with our partnership with Amazon. So Citrix has had a long-standing relationship with Amazon, some 13 plus years. We've integrated pretty much all our services and products somewhere within Amazon. And I think what most people know us for when we say Citrix and Amazon is that first column there, which is EC2. EC2 has been around forever. It is IaaS, as everyone knows, compute and storage. It's like a bunch of Legos. You have all the parts there, and you can build whatever you want, whatever you dream up. We at Citrix have had our integration there with CVAD on-prem, as well as the Citrix DaaS cloud-based service. And we've been using MCS for this integration. So all orchestration happens through the machine creation services. We've offer persistent, non-persistent, single and multi-session, as well as Windows and Linux operating systems there. And you can do any type of VDA identity. So the machine identity can be domain joined, it can be hybrid Entra ID, or non-domain joined. And then the pricing for this has traditionally been variable slash usage based, which what that means is as it's pay as you go. As you use it, based on what machines that you choose within EC2 to run your workloads on, you're going to get charged for that compute and storage, etc. And traditionally, you've not been able to install Microsoft 365 apps in your images. You've been kind of forced to use the web-based apps, or you have to use an older version that's installed, and possibly even have to pay extra, almost like a double tax for the Office Productivity Suite. So that's where EC2 has been traditionally. And what we did I want to say about 4 years ago, with Amazon in a joint partnership, is we released the capability to use Citrix DaaS on this middle column, which is the Amazon Workspaces core integration. This is basically the front end of Citrix. So you have the admin experience and the end user experience. So you've got Studio, and you've got HDX protocol, and you've got the Workspace app. 100% Citrix in the front end. But the back-end orchestration is being handled by Workspaces. Specifically, Workspaces Core is aimed at partners. So it's the Workspaces orchestration, which Amazon is best in breed in for infrastructure and orchestration in the data center. We're taking direct advantage of that via APIs. And so for that reason, you're able to get a different managed experience for that backend, where it's not just a bunch of Legos laying out. It's purpose-built EUC machines being managed in the data center in a separate area of the data center by a separate team. And this gives you a lot of efficiencies, a lot of R&D that your company may have had to do in the past. It's not there anymore. We have this quick deploy option. So in Studio, you go in and it's a 5-step process to deploy desktops, and you can go from nothing to desktops pretty quickly. It's a little bit different than MCS in the first column because it is fully API based. With that said, this is a very, very simple solution, in my opinion, that gives you quick desktops, but it only gives it to you in certain formats, which means that it's persistent desktops only. It's single and multi-session. You have Windows and Linux, but again, it's persistent desktops only. It's not the non-persistent that you may be used to with MCS. We support domain and hybrid join here. And the good thing about this, it's very easy to predict your costs. This is the first time ever you can do flat rate pricing. So let's say that a particular instance type is $20 per month per user. If you have a business unit that comes to you and says, hey, I need 100 users for XYZ number of months, you can say, well, it's $20 per user per month. And there's no contract to sign. There's no long-term commitment. It's month to month. The additional point about this integration is that the M365 apps, for the first time ever, outside of Azure and on-prem, you can run M365 in a separate cloud that's not Microsoft owned. So this is this does not apply to EC2. I want to be clear about that. It only applies to the Workspaces environment, and Workspaces Core is part of that. So this is a very special commitment between three companies, actually, Citrix, Amazon, and Microsoft. Now, recently, last year, we released the capability for this third column, which is the Amazon Workspaces Core managed instances. This takes it even further. We, as two separate organizations, we came together and said, hey, look, we've got some of the best in breed solution here built with the Workspaces Core bundle integration. Let's take it a step further and take everything that we've done in EC2 and like seal that feature parity. Just make sure we're 100% covered. So here in CMI, we have both DAS and CVAT support. So you can do on-prem control planes or you can do the cloud-based control plane. It is fully MCS driven now. So there are still API calls being done as well, but MCS is controlling it fully. So you don't have to go to a different part of the Studio UI. The workflows that you have today, any type of CI/CD pipelines that you have using Terraform or direct API calls, all of that is fully supported because you're just using MCS. The delivery type, we now have non-persistent capability with Workspaces Core. So now you can do your traditional pools of desktops, non-persistent. People are on there, they turn them off, they restart, they come up clean. That capability is there now. Persistent desktops as well is there, single and multi-session, as well as Windows and Linux operating systems. Additionally, we have domain join support, hybrid intra-ID domain support, and we have non-domain join support. So for those that just want to use a fleet of desktops and manage it through different policy engines, you can do that. You can keep them off the domain, off the enterprise network, and just have like a pocket of desktops for M&A activity for contractors and whatnot that don't have direct access to the enterprise network. So now we have all of that capability. The other big thing about this new release is the pricing. So previously, variable was EC2 only, and Workspaces Core bundles offer the flat rate per month. Now with CMI, you can do both. And that variable is what we launched with last year. The flat rate pricing we just recently released. So it's actually been rolling out for the past week. So most folks on the call, if you're not aware of this, you can go in and actually do flat rate pricing now. We're going to bring it more prominently into the UI here shortly, but if you don't see it yet, just reach out to me and I can assist you with that. But yeah, we do have flat rate pricing now. So that same predictable costs in the cloud, which in my opinion has been a roadblock for very, very large cloud projects. Sometimes you get to the point where the costs are not how you predicted just because of the nature of the business, the nature of end users. They are using desktops different ways. You have to bring up the performance and the spec of certain instance types. And sometimes what you predicted is not what really happens. With this, you can actually predict it and say, hey, these users are using this instance type. This is the price per month, not a penny more. And you can actually predict your costs in the cloud, which is wonderful. So now you have that capability with CMI. And then lastly, of course, Microsoft 365 apps. You can use the latest and greatest Office Productivity Suite burned into your image, again, with non-persistent and with persistent both. So I think we've pretty much gotten 100% feature parity now across the board. Every feature request that we've had from the field, from our users, from our partners, we've built it right into the product, and we have a lot more coming this year. So I'll just stop there and hand it over to Joe for a little bit more of the deeper architecture on this.
Thanks, Jason, for the comprehensive overview of the Citrix delivery options on top of AWS. As Sarah mentioned earlier, my name is Joe Jabbour. I'm a senior solutions architect specialist on the EUC team here at AWS. And what we're looking at right now, what we're going to dive into is an architectural diagram of Citrix on Amazon Workspace's core managed instances. So obviously that's a mouthful. When I say CMI, that's talking about core managed instances. So I'll refer to it as Citrix on Amazon Workspace's CMI moving forward. But the key takeaway here is that if you already know Citrix, you already know this architectural diagram, right? This deployment model is fundamentally the same whether you're on-prem, you're on another hyperscaler, or you're deployed here on AWS. This is a single region deployment, and to your Citrix deployment, Workspace's core is just another resource location. And that's what this diagram is depicting. That's what I'm going to walk you through. So if you start at the top, you'll see that your Citrix Cloud Control and your access plane are going to remain unchanged. You have Citrix DAS broker and sessions, you have gateway service handling and secure remote access, and you have analytics for monitoring. This is the same Citrix Cloud you're already using today. And obviously, Citrix is always adding services. There's more services there now. If you go to Citrix Cloud and you click on the hamburger menu on the left-hand side, you'll see a ton of services. But for the purpose of this diagram or for CMI, this is what we're depicting here. And then the key thing again is that this doesn't care where your resource location lives. Citrix Cloud can deploy to an on-prem resource location, a private cloud resource location, many public cloud hyperscaler resource locations, and even a resource location under your desk. And the beauty of this and the whole reason we're here today is talking about how can I create fault tolerance across multiple public clouds, multiple public hyperscalers for my VDI deployment. So if we just drop into AWS, you'll see the standard nested structure there. So on the outermost box, you'll see we have AWS Cloud. Then you have a region. So for the purpose of this diagram, you could think about a region as US East 1. So a region in AWS is just going to be a collection of clustered data centers within a single geographic region. And then in blue, you can see we're pointing to this as our resource location, or we're calling it out as our resource location. So this is going to be actually our resource location in the Citrix Studio console. So continuing down, dropping down, you're going to see that we have two availability zones. An availability zone, and this is an important point if you're not familiar with it, is just a collection of one or more data centers within a region. And what this is depicting is that you're getting high availability between multiple data centers in a single resource location. So you don't no longer have to think of a resource location as my data center in, say, Secaucus, New Jersey, right? My resource location is going to be across two availability zones, two data centers, and actually, or at minimum, two separate buildings. So everything you can see in this diagram that's in AZ1 is mirrored in AZ2, but it doesn't have to be for your deployment, right? You decide on how you're deploying it when you're designing it. But just to dive in a little further, how do we create a resource location? Well, the same way you do today. You basically would you would deploy an EC2 instance, and on top of that EC2 instance, you would deploy a Citrix Cloud connector. So you would at least put one of those per region, depending on your deployment needs. And once I have my Citrix Cloud connector deployed, I can then go and create my resource location in the Citrix console. From there, what do? I need to get an image over into Amazon EC2 to be able to deploy machine catalogs. You could either leverage the image portability service from Citrix to pull over an existing image, or you could deploy a fresh EC2 instance, desktop or server operating system, snapshot it, create your AMI, and then you use that AMI to create an image definition in the Citrix console. So once you have that image definition, as Jason mentioned, this is just MCS calling our APIs under a hood. So you go into your Citrix console, you would create an image definition, and then you would go into your machine catalog window and you would deploy a machine catalog using this image that you just created. So take an example where you've created a finance image. You create a finance image definition, and you would create a finance machine catalog for availability zone 1, and you would create a finance machine catalog for availability zone 2. What this allows you to do is then create a single delivery group, which is going to aggregate machines from machine catalog 1 and machine catalog 2. So you get that fault tolerance that we're talking about inside of a single region, right? So now I'm aggregated resources across multiple subnets, across multiple availability zones, across multiple data centers. So continuing left, I have some optional services depicted, right? We have Amazon AWS Managed Active Directory. We have FSX. So let's dive back into like your machine catalog. So you have a Windows non-persistent desktop deployed. You're deploying some sort of profile management. Maybe that's FS Logics. Well, those profiles need a place to live, right? You could store those profiles on FSX. And the purpose of the services on the left is just to depict that any services that you deploy on AWS would be applicable to you or available to you at low latency with no hairpinning traffic back to your data center. Now, all of this to say, if you did want to route traffic to another public hyperscaler or a data center, as long as you have a direct connect or VPN connectivity, the beauty is that all of these machines for Workspace's CMI, Workspace's core managed instances, are deployed with the ENI that lives in your VPC. So basically, you can think of that as a NIC that lives in a subnet that you manage. So your route tables, your firewall rules, we're not touching it. We're not acting on them at all, right? Citrix is doing the orchestration, the deployment for them. So just to wrap up real quick, why does this matter? So first, like familiarity. So if your team uses Citrix, they can, if your team uses Citrix today, they can deploy this tomorrow. It has the same studio, same as MCS as Jason mentioned, same HX protocol, same monitoring protocol, same analytics, everything. Second is going to be your flexibility, right? You're not locked into a single cloud. This is just another resource location alongside your existing ones. And then third is going to be speed. So you can stand up a Citrix environment without procuring hardware, without long lead times. All you need to do is create a resource location, connect it to your AWS account, import an image, and then start your deployment. That's really it. So when we talk about mergers and acquisitions, scaling for summer interns, bursting for production peaks, bursting DR workloads, as Michael alluded to, you could do all of that at low cost, right? So you could do almost like an active passive environment. You have a copy of your images over on Workspace's core managed instances, and you only burst to it in a DR type event or a scaling type event. So Workspace's core is going to give you the managed compute. Citrix is going to give you the control plane and the user experience, and then together it's enterprise VDI without reinventing the wheel completely. So on to Zeljko.
Hey, Joe, thanks a lot. And my name is Zeljko Macanovic. I am the chief architect for Ferroque Systems. So in the next couple of slides, we will going to look into some practical design considerations and trade-offs when it comes to the multi-cloud. The very first thing is to define what kind of risk you're trying to mitigate and how to reach the desired results. For example, are you looking to do like geographic diversification, provider diversification, or you're looking to do both of those? The criticality of the service that you're trying actually to diversify is the driving factor and will drive this decision. Now, if there are no financial constraints, the best use case scenario you can come up with would be like two different cloud providers with different regions for each cloud provider. And if you want to spread out even more, you can also look it up to say, hey, I'm not going to mix those geographical regions. So, for example, if I'm putting my Azure regions are going to be the East or South Central, I can put my AWS regions to be, I don't know, West and North Central, something like that. If that is the requirement that you need to cover with your resiliency or with your design. So once you addressed all this, next thing is, well, we need to look it up into what is still the single point of failure. The best example of that single point of failure when we do the multi-cloud would be Entra ID. So what happens if the Entra ID is down? Is there another IDP we can use for users to log in? And if there isn't, should there be one already in place? Like use Okta, use anything else. It really doesn't matter. So the next thing to look it up is really when it comes to the Citrix designing for different cloud providers really increases complexity. For example, the different provisioning limits for Azure and AWS. So you need to take that into account. There are also other components that influence Citrix design on Azure and AWS. And those are like Azure subscription versus AWS VPC distribution. You got to make sure these are optimally designed and configured for both clouds. Availability zones between Azure and AWS are different, behave differently, and you need to take that into account when you're doing the design. The storage considerations, as Joe mentioned earlier, would be There are different storage providers. What are we looking for the storage? We need to put for the profiles, share folders, share files. And what happens if we're using the OneDrive for Business and Azure is not? How are we going to take that into account? Different instances, machine instances, and availability of instances. For example, there are no multi-session Windows 11s or desktop operating systems in AWS. So if you require the multi-session VDA, then you have to look it up into RDS servers if application allows that RDS server to be used. Another thing to look it up is the app layering, Citrix app layering availability in AWS. These are just a few considerations for Citrix design when it comes to the multi-cloud environment. And in essence, you really need to do the separate design decisions documented for each cloud provider. The next thing is to look into operational considerations. And I mean, we have two clouds. We need to support two different cloud providers, hence increasing the complexity and cost as we need the different skill sets to support this. Azure and AWS are cloud providers that are mostly used with Citrix environment. And there are cross-cloud feature gaps or differences that needs to be taken into consideration. For example, identity management, desktop density, cost, networking, security, just to mention the few of those. On the next slide, we will talk about application strategy. So when we talked on the previous slide, we were talking about the mitigation of a risk. Now, keep in mind, and Michael already mentioned this, not all workloads needs to be in both clouds or in multi-cloud. You got to start with the most critical workloads, your tier zeros or tier ones, and the workloads that have the most impact on the business. Mike also mentioned the other option of diversification is for those non-critical workloads to kind of lower the impact domain. You can split your workloads between the Azure and AWS. One example is, okay, I want to use my multi-sessions, and I'm going to put my multi-sessions in Azure, and then my single sessions, I can do AWS in the single session VDAs. That is really just an example, and this can be kind of spread out. You need to kind of figure this out. If you're designing for multi-cloud, those decisions will come after your design sessions and discovery are done. The very next thing is, and very important thing, is the application backend cross-cloud compatibility. And that is probably one of the defining factors when it comes to the business continuity or disaster recovery. The very question is, can my backend app be in active mode or at least active standby mode? And what is the recovery time objective? Like if we need to make the Citrix VDAs highly available, that's easy. If I need the notepad, really nobody cares about that. But we need to make sure that our VDAs are actually running applications with no discrepancies within application itself, talking about applications that have a backend databases or backend configuration at all. The best example for these would be like EMR, banking, trading, air carriers, gaming, insurance apps, etc., etc. I think Mike had more than I was listing here. So when planning for multi-cloud, we need to make sure that we have the same distributed image between the clouds. Joe already mentioned about using the Citrix image portability service, and that's an easy way of doing that. But there are tools and scripts that you can use to get the identical image across the environments. But the very similar points apply to application portability. Let's say there is an application virtualization that is required, and we need to ensure it is available for both Azure and AWS, and that user experience running those applications do not differ. In some cases, we need to kind of use third-party providers that will have with application virtualization, such as, let's say, Liquidware or Numecent. Access and control plane resiliency. Oh my goodness, this can be so complicated. So let's take just a simple use case that we have two clouds with two different regions. first of all, if you require such a resiliency, you got to make sure that you control your SLAs. When you want to control your SLAs, that means you want to put your NetScalers and storefront servers in each cloud in each region. Now, starting when you do that, you got to make sure that those components, storefronts, and NetScalers are actually highly available in each region, GSLB'd across regions, and also GSLB'd across cloud providers. Now, when you start looking into those components, that access layer design becomes complicated very, very fast. Governance and certification. So when it comes to governance and certification, both Azure and AWS offer very comprehensive and compliance frameworks, but they do differ in approach. So based on these compliance frameworks, the additional security reviews and approvals may be required as we're working with different providers, and we need to ensure we align with the required policies. On the next slide, we will just touch base and look it up that Citrix has the wide cloud support. And you can see from the slide and from the first question we had, what cloud do you use? Like all these clouds are supported. The Citrix in general is cloud agnostic, same way it was a hypervisor agnostic. And you can pick and choose. However, most of the usage we see, at least we as architects and consultants, see the usage of Azure and AWS, some GCP, but those are the most used clouds within a Citrix. And they are closest in capabilities. And in my opinion, they're very close to the CVAD on-prem implementation. Other providers are also viable, especially for some specific use cases. And with this, I will pass the mic. I will pass the mic to Mike with his closing notes.
Cute, Zeljko, real cute. Okay, so let's bring this all in here, bring it back home. So look, and have a quick practical risk conversation as we close this out. We know several organizations, usually in the banking sector, who its enterprise risk team mandates duplicate clouds or more, duplicate endpoint suppliers because they learned some harsh lessons from COVID, redundant server suppliers for the same reason. I know some organizations who are M365 shops, but have on standby Google Workspace for their most critical leaders, so that if for any reason M365 ever went down, they've got a way of spinning up alternative services so they can get back to work. Same customer also has about 5,000 licenses of Zoom that they pay for on a regular basis so that if for any reason Teams goes down, they've got something they can rapidly switch to as a backup. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that there is an ongoing trend within organizations coming from a risk standpoint to de-risk a lot of areas of applications that they don't have direct control over because they're SaaS apps or they're third-party platforms. And this is what some organizations in some extremes have gone to, including others that have also adopted a redundant identity provider solution. They've got Entra, they've also got Okta, right? So does it add complexity? Yes. Does it add cost? Of course. But what you're getting is resiliency. So the exploration of multi-cloud across enterprises is continuing to increase, and the likelihood of cost and complexity does increase as well, but that's just the price to be paid for resiliency. And typically, the price for many organizations of that resiliency is far less than the cost of the actual outage implication that could result. So splitting use cases between clouds or use cases into opposing clouds is viable depending on criticality of the workload. Apps, core infrastructure, features, licensing, all must be part of the resiliency conversation as well. And for mission critical workloads, outage impacts, as I mentioned, is often going to outweigh the multi-cloud risks, especially in financial compliance and reputation reasons. Do regular table talk exercises with your teams. That's not just your business units. It would also be the IT folks, the folks that are managing the solution, your app owners. You'd be surprised what you didn't consider when you start doing tabletop exercises to look at, hey, what if this outage happened? What if this component goes down? What if that happens? And it's that creative process that'll bring up new areas. Well, other than making you more paranoid, it's going to bring up more areas of thought that you and risk that you may not have thought of before that might have easy or obviously potentially more complex ways of solving them. But it also allows you to draw the lines on what you're ready to design resiliency for and mitigate the risk of if there's an outage, and what you're not ready to design resiliency for due to cost or complexity, or how potentially unlikely a particular risk is. So it's important to control the full dependency stack. Citrix, as an example, as an EUC solution, has a number of different dependencies. And whether it's the business applications, the identity, the backend clouds, how you're delivering your apps, your user profiles, or whatever, those all really need to be part of the conversation because they all represent a area of failure that could occur that you need to be having some level of accommodation for, if possible. Sorry, no, not finished. Sorry. Go back. Go back.
Working on it. All right, there we go.
Yep. Azure and AWS are a great pairing together because they are so close in their features and capabilities and their cloud maturities. So they're a great place to start if you are actively in AWS and want to expand to Azure, or vice versa, to adopt a multi-cloud strategy and really be proactive in socializing resiliency. This is an ongoing conversation that organizations are continuing to have, and we're starting to see even smaller organizations get into this. Organizations that do have various compliance requirements or what have you. This starts to come up more and more, and it's a really important conversation. It goes well beyond HA and DR. And a lot of elements of resiliency are covered in the DR planning guide that we helped write for Citrix going back a number of years. We'll provide a link to that later. A lot of the same considerations apply, even though we have said that recovery does not equal resiliency. Resiliency is much broader and much more impactful than that. And Citrix is the platform that allows you to build resiliency against a multitude of outages, and frankly, ones that a lot of other competitors can't. If you're running, let's say, AVD natively, there's been outages in the last while that took down people's abilities to launch sessions. And that's just a reality. Citrix provides you the ability to counteract that by fully controlling your access tier and managing that in-house and having a best of both worlds scenario, and the ability to leverage multiple identity providers if you need to in a identity provider outage scenario. There's a lot of possibilities to design for resiliency the way you see fit with Citrix and across multiple clouds. And again, we've just been focusing on the multi-cloud aspect, but there's a lot of other areas in a broader risk conversation that this could open up to. We're just shining a light on one specific area of that. And hopefully we provide a little bit of value to you to at least get the thoughts rolling through your heads and perhaps things you can take back to your teams in large, with the overall hope that we can help customers through education and just socialization, these types of concepts to build more resilient infrastructures that keep the businesses running. With that, hand it over for next steps and open it up for questions.
Yeah, so next step, so you can schedule an assessment with one of our experts, and there's our email there. You can engage with us on our blog and within the Citrix community. So we encourage you to take a look into those as well. But before we wrap up, I know we had quite a few questions come in. So I can go ahead and start with the first one. Please advise on how to emulate and test disaster recovery in Citrix cloud environment. I don't know who'd like to take that one.
Well, I can take it, being that I was supposed to, I'm probably closest to it. It really depends on the use case. DAS makes it a lot easier if you're using Citrix Cloud, because if you're not using DAS and you're using the full on-prem CVAD deployments, there's a lot more components that you need to deploy. It's a lot more complicated. DAS is much easier because you take the resiliency configurations to occur at the within delivery groups within a resource location. So you're able to pair up, especially if you're using storefront, the ability to prefer one set of resources over another and vice versa. So that is probably the easiest way to do it. You can either make them active passive or active active, whatever your case is, but it's a lot easier to configure those types of things. But that's assuming that you've got an always on active active scenario. If your Citrix DAS environment, just due to budgetary constraints, has you needing to have not a hot standby, but more of a warm DR, where maybe in a DR resource location, you don't have all your resources spun up, all your VDAs spun up, then there's always some additional manual effort that will have to go in to spin those things up and what have you. So the disaster recovery planning document that I provided, again, that's just a stepping stone towards resiliency and can give some ideas on how to design for resiliency. There's a number of different scenarios that we wrote in there that is largely driven by essentially budgetary constraints and how critical a workload is, and DR and recovery strategies that will help match the budgetary capabilities of the organization. And they may vary from workload to workload. You may have got tier 1 or 2.0 workloads that have to be online all the time. You have those deployed in both clouds, active. They're essentially always being tested, although it is very important in active scenarios that you're always monitoring capacity. Because if you do not monitor capacity, and next thing you know, you've slowly crept up to 60% utilization in Cloud A and Cloud B for a given use case. When an outage goes down, you're out of capacity in your surviving cloud, you're not going to have a good time. So hopefully that's given some inkling of where to take that question. Take that as an answer. But yeah, it's a complicated discussion, suffice to say. It depends on a number of different variables. I'll get off my
Thank you,
soapbox.
Michael. Thank you. Our next question is, any thoughts of PVS being used rather than MSC or MCS?
Yeah, I can take that one. So if you use Citrix for a long time, you've probably used PVS, which is our more network-based provisioning mechanism, and then you have MCS, which is when cloud started to become really prevalent, is when we started using MCS. It was more storage based versus completely network based. In cloud type environments, especially with the advent of so many hyperscalers and with a lot of hypervisors and coming in as well, most of our integration these days is more toward MCS. PVS is there as well, but with specifically hyperscalers and cloud, there's a little bit of complexity that you don't have full hypervisor level access. So for this reason, a lot of the integrations that we do that are more API driven, that are more storage driven, these type of things happen with MCS. And for that reason, MCS is really the solution here for us for CMI. At this time, we're exploring different options, but we're always looking at new ways of doing integrations, everything that folks are asking for. But if you have certain things that you're doing in PVS today and you don't think it's possible in MCS, please let me know directly. You have my contact information, I'm sure. But let me know, and we can see if we can add that type of capability within this MCS CMI integration. But for now, I just want to be clear that the integration is only with MCS and CMI. That's the direction that we've taken.
Yeah, and that's specific to on the AWS front, correct? Yeah,
Yes,
because there
specifically on Workspace Support, right? On Azure, we do have a PVS. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no, this is exactly it. On Azure, there is a PVS component. I honestly can't speak to how popular it's been. I probably have to check with our PM friends there, but it is there as a capability, but that is not a capability that is in
It's not that very
AWS.
popular. There is ability to use it, but from actual technical perspective, I see more of MCS usage in Azure than PVS. It adds complexity, really adds complexity. Then you have to get the control of the network, and it's just another thing to manage. I mean, it is faster in a certain way, especially when it comes to pushing the images, pushing everything else. But when you look it up into deep down, you have very similar controls when it goes to the image versioning and everything else. So I've seen mostly MCS. I would probably say 80 to 20 MCS to PVS implementation in Azure.
Thank you. All right, our next question. Is there any API call throttling that AWS has when there is auto scale at large volume? Is hibernation supported in AWS for Citrix workloads?
Yep. So I could take those questions. So hibernation is supported on EC2, and Citrix is just running Workspace's core managed instances on top of EC2. So all hibernation luxuries, requirements, it all works the same way it would on EC2, right? Because it is EC2. So yes, for hibernation. As far as throttling, we have service level throttles for EC2, right? And rate limiting. If you think that you're going to hit those and those are publicly documented, we can work together to possibly look to see if we could put an exception in. But we have large companies doing this at scale that are not running into issues. So, as Jason mentioned, reach out to him. Definitely reach out to me. I could put you in touch with your account team, your assigned solutions architect, and we could talk through those design decisions.
It's a good question, though.
Yeah, it's a great
Whoever raised
question.
that, good.
Our friend
All right.
Baden raised that.
Yes, great question. All right, one more. Will Citrix discontinue CVAD in the future? CVAD.
I can take that one. No, we have no plans for that. We fully support CVAD that's our on-prem self-managed solution. We actually have customers that take CVAD and put it in the cloud because they want that self-managed experience. So you can absolutely do that as well. We fully support it. We have a lot of air-gapped environments. We work with a lot of governments, a lot of state and federal, globally actually. We have a lot of oil and gas type environments. We have some healthcare environments, SCADA systems, operational technologies. These things are air-gapped environments, and CVAD is very, very prevalent in these areas. We will continue to support it absolutely 100%, just like we do today with our Citrix Cloud and our DAS-based solution. Those are for companies that have no issues with air gaps and need to have a centralized, cloud control plane across multiple regions. We serve 3 different regions there, where we can have the different control planes in, as well as our gov for those governments that have workloads that are not air gap. They usually use that control plane. So all of this is equal. We have everything that we do as far as features. We tend to have full feature parity across both. There are a few things that are cloud only just because of the nature of that particular feature. But every time we release a feature there, we're always looking to bring it to CVAD as well. But actually, how we develop in-house is we develop both together. We very rarely go for just a cloud only option. We're always thinking CVAD as well. Sometimes the timelines might be just a little off, but the only times where there is where it's just an only cloud only feature is when that particular feature is very cloud driven and is very difficult to do with the on-prem control plane. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, it's been from the partner side of the fence, it's definitely a bit of a different tone than what it was about 5+ years ago, where all
Yes.
development was done in CVAD, and if you were lucky, it might trickle down to sorry, it was all done in DAS, and it might trickle down to CVAD, but that's definitely hasn't been the case for the last few years. There's been a pretty distinct commitment to make both feature parity and maintain them equally.
Yeah, there are at parity, mostly at the parity. The one thing I just want to go, sorry for interrupting, to go to the first question, I want to direct everybody who's looking the DR to a article. Mike, what was the article name? It's a Citrix article.
It's on the TechZone article. It's the
It's a
DR planning guide that
DR
gives some
planning guide.
indications. That's what I was
Please
alluding to
check that
before.
out because that covers really, really quite a bit of the situation. And then actually takes the distinction, what is actual DR, what is high availability? Because a lot of people don't know clear distinction between those two.
Okay. Let's try and take one more question if we can, and I think we can close it out. But if we didn't get to your question, please do write us at hello@ferroquesystems.com, and we'll make sure that everyone here on this panel will get to your question. We'll make sure we get back to you.
So our one last question is, I want to design a multi-cloud approach. How do I manage the fallover?
The failover. Okay.
Well,
Well,
Failover, my bad.
I mean, I can take that one.
you take that
Uh,
one.
yeah, I love those kind of questions because
It
the answer
depends.
depends. Of course, it depends. Well, what are you failing over? Are you failing over your access layer? Are you failing over your workloads? How do you do your workloads? If again, it all depends how you provision your workloads. Let's say you provision the same image with the same provisioning method on the same, like you have an MCS with MCSI, and you have the catalogs across both clouds. Now you can put that in the single delivery group and then just make sure, like, when the one is not accessible, the other is accessible. Again, that also depends on, are you active or active passive? In some situation where that is there are some blips for you when you're in an active passive or zone preference and the failover. If you start using that, there are some situations because the whole machine catalog has to be inaccessible. It has to be reported either as down or unregistered to Citrix Cloud, so you can actually start pulling from other ones. But we're talking about disaster recovery. Once we start talking about disaster recovery, that's a whole process. Something happened, and you get to a VP's level on the call. What are our next steps? Then we start invoking like tier 0, tier 1 apps. The Citrix is usually depending on organization, but for hospitals, for example, the Citrix is tier 1 application. So tier 0 application would be your EMR, tier 1 would be Citrix. So you recover your tier 0 application, your EMR, then you recover your Citrix. And right in the next step, you don't want to actually be automatic in that process, because you can recover Citrix faster than you can recover your EMR. And then what you do, you made more mess than what you should have done. Again, that really needs a very long conversation and design planning around it. Yeah,
We've done the DR webinar in the past, come to think of it. I think we did one a couple of years ago. But here's the thing. In the context of resiliency, the holy grail is to move beyond recovery and make sure that if today you're working on Azure and tomorrow you're working in AWS and vice versa, it should be seamless. You should design your systems in such a way that they're always being used at any given time. So the concept of recovery shouldn't even come into play, because you've designed your systems in such a way that they're available from both data centers, including your file services, including your applications, where they can run from either location on a whim. We know many customers that aren't even in clouds that design their environments like that. And just for fun, they'll work from one data center for an entire month and then flip it over and run from the other data center for another month. And then the third one, they run across both data centers and it's fully seamless to the users. That's the level of resiliency you truly want to get to, where it's not even talking about recovery. It's just talking about business as usual, business continuity.
And in that situation, we do have a customer. Some of my customers do that. They do it on a 6-month period. They flip one data center to another data center. And at that time, you're testing your DR every 6 months.
Yeah.
So,
all right, we're well over time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We hope this has been valuable and hope to catch you on the next one.